You're listening to the Arizona Society of CPAs podcast.
Thank you all for joining today, and for those that are listening in. I'm John Baumer, Director of Government Relations with the Society of CPAs, joined as always by Ryan Demena, partner at Demena Public Affairs and longtime CPA advocate. Joining us today is Representative Seth Blattman from Legislative District 9, which encompasses parts of Mesa and Tempe. Seth and his family moved to Arizona when he was 10 years old and he went on to earn his bachelor's in political science from ASU. He took business courses while working in his family's furniture manufacturing shop and later moved to California to get his MBA from UCLA. After returning to Arizona to help his family in the wake of the Great Recession, Seth took on a leadership role in the family business. Currently in the legislature, he is a member of the Military Affairs and Public Safety and Ways and Means Committee. And this is his first term as an elected state legislator. So thank you, sir, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Excited to be here. It's always interesting hearing the bio. Yeah, good memories.
So to kick it off, it's kind of perfect timing. We couldn't have planned it better. The historic budget passed a few weeks ago with a divided government. That was everyone's expectation that this would go until June, way ahead of schedule. Can you give us what your assessment is on this bipartisan budget and what, if any, of your priorities were included in the final package?
Sure. So I voted yes on the budget. So I'm definitely a big fan of the budget. I think this was a great thing to get done in Governor Hobbs's first year. Bipartisan budget. This included unanimous support among the Republican caucus and the good majority of the Democratic caucus. This in one-time funds is really historic investments in $300 million for public education, $210 million for affordable housing, money for veterans, money for transitional housing for inmates. We did get a priority in the budget. $5 million small business fund was set up based on a piece of legislation I had. I was very happy that both the governor, leadership of the Democrats and the Republicans chose to include that in this year's budget. I think this is really a great thing to have gotten done in such record time as well. It's bipartisanship, it's divided government in action. And I think it's a budget that's going to really help a lot of Arizonans.
I think, and I got to jump in too. It was really surprising, even to some of us longtime watchers. Representative Blattman, we've always said the budget in the past, you get legislative leadership, the approps chairs, the budget staff in the room. And I've always said it's a little bit like, you're making a stew. They sort of identify the main ingredients. And then once you have those main ingredients in place, you kind of talk to other members about what various spices you need to add to get to the final product. This was a much different approach in that they effectively allotted chunks of the one-time money to members, the Democrats, the governor, and said, you all figure out your priorities. Hot button topics are off the table. Let's bring those, into the stew and let's put this thing together. They've attempted that in similar fashions in the past, and it's never worked. And so anyway, just curious, as a first-year legislator, and you're, I'm sure, familiar with kind of how budgeting has been done in the past at the legislature, were you surprised by this process?
Yes, a bit. And I think talking about the process, my caucus was split on the vote ultimately. And I think a lot of it came down to process and feeling included in the process.
Yeah.
So this was, from my understanding, mostly negotiated by Governor Hobbs, Senate President Peterson, and Leader Toma and their staffs. And as far as allocating 20 to 30 million, this is the most efficient way a budget's ever been done. I mean, this was get 3 people in a room, their staffs, lots of money, and things can get done in really a good time. But Democratic leadership felt that they weren't as included in the process as they would have liked. We're going to rectify that for the next budget. Although we were included in the process, sort of the way I saw it coming from my point of view was, in the House, we all met with our leadership, Democratic leadership, to give them our priorities. They met with Governor Hobbs, and Governor Hobbs expressed our point of view when negotiating with Peterson and Toma. We saw the 20 to 30 million, which is very interesting. We see a lot of infrastructure in the budget as a result of that. I'm very pro-infrastructure, so I'm glad to see all of that in there. And then on the Democratic side, we saw the giant opportunity. Democratic governor for the first time in decades. So we chose to pool our asks together to get those bigger ones, like the $300 million for public education and the money for affordable housing.
Yeah. And I will say, this wasn't necessarily in divided government, reinventing the wheel. You know, John, we had Senator Bennett, for example, come and speak to the society a couple of weeks ago. And he had mentioned he was Senate president when Janet Napolitano was governor. And at the time, you had Jim Wires was Speaker of the House. And interestingly enough, names that you may know and others listening in may know, Eddie Farnsworth was his majority leader, or I'm sorry, it was Speaker Jake Flake. Eddie Farnsworth was his majority leader, and Russell Pierce was the appropriations chairman. So you can imagine with that mixture, sort of what those negotiations may have looked like. And what happened is it ultimately came down to the three leaders. Really, Bennett doing a lot of shuttle diplomacy, but it wasn't the more traditional process that we're used to of having, you know, the appropriations chairs and their staff and OSPB in the room. It was in divided government, negotiated by the leaders.
And we all have like different backgrounds in private industry, or I've done business and negotiations as very basic part of bringing on a customer, bringing on a vendor. You know from that experience, the fewer people in the room, the quicker something gets done. It's sort of the way it is. The more people you have in the room, like it might be more representative, but too many voices in the room is never a good thing. It slows things down and can lead to block and to bad places. So from an efficiency point of view, the whole time I was saying this is going to lead to a quick budget. I think the process worked very well.
You both kind of touched on this. So there was the allocation of those amounts for the Democratic caucus and individual Republican members, largely because we had such a huge one-time balance. We've pretty much depleted that for the 2024 legislative session and the subsequent fiscal year's budget. So I'm curious, Representative, if you think A, it'll be done the same way in the future, and B, if so, how does that work when we don't have this pot of money to divide up amongst everybody?
That's a great question. It's $1 million question. So this first budget was negotiated mostly with one-time funds, and projections for next year are substantially less. 2.5 billion, and now we have I saw 90 billion. So your guess is as good as mine. I'm saying all I can say is that I know talks are beginning very early this time around. Certainly Democratic leadership is already meeting with the governor's office to discuss next year's budget. So I think that'll help a lot.
Yeah.
But we'll see where the deal can be made ultimately this next time. I mean, ongoing funds are ongoing funds. One-time funds are limited. There's sort of the outside stuff, but where we meet in the middle will be very interesting for next session.
Yeah. I'm always curious, as a freshman lawmaker, kind of what was your impression coming in? I mean, are there things that really surprised you, or was it sort of as expected? Because I got to say, and this is not necessarily blowing smoke your way, but you watch lawmakers who are fresh to the process kind of walk on to the playground, as it were. John and I say this frequently, as a new lawmaker, it's not that you don't know how to get a bill introduced and passed into law. It's that you don't know where to park. You haven't met your assistant. You don't know where the dang coffee maker is, so the learning curve is so extraordinary. It might as well be a wall in some cases. But in your case, you seem to kind of hit the ground running. And so I don't know, were you an observer beforehand? Like, how'd you do it?
I definitely had paid attention to the legislature beforehand, which was helpful. But I think a lot of people, freshmen included, we're aware of the process. We've seen it on TV or on stream or on news coverage.
Yeah.
But being a freshman is, it's like being a freshman. Or this is a new job. Taking any new job, the first week is certainly learning where the water fountain is and learning where the food is. So it was you feel that first week when you're down there. You also feel the responsibility that's been laid at your feet. You realize you really do have a unique position to affect people's lives while you're there. And I guess if anything surprised me, there were a couple of things. I didn't necessarily know what to expect as far as partisan relationships.
Okay.
And whether it's going to be pure animosity or, I didn't exactly know what it was like. And I had asked legislators prior to be elected, like, what's it like? But, I found pretty quickly that, we're all human beings. Building relationships is a big part of being effective down there. I have friends in the Democratic Party, friends in the Republican Party, been able to build those relationships and look forward to working with these people and get along on an interpersonal level, which I think is extremely important. Now, on policy, we avoid some of those conversations to keep the interpersonal going. But building those relationships has been very important. So I definitely prioritize that, and moving forward, we'll definitely keep those conversations going.
The name of the game, as we've always said, is compartmentalization, because really, if you paint with that broad brush, you're not going to be able to form any of those relationships that allow you to get things done where you may agree in the future. My sort of default setting, and I think John operates the same way, that as a lawmaker, or at least someone involved in the policymaking process, we probably agree 80, 90, north of 90% of the time. It really is maybe that 5% that are sort of those hot button topics that get people a little hot under the collar. And so really, it's a process of incremental victories. And so you don't, it's that don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Just because you don't get along on this one issue doesn't mean there are 9 others that you can't, lock arms and tackle.
Well, and Representative, with the one vote margins that Republicans hold in the House and the Senate, and now we've got Democratic Governor Hobbs for the next 3 sessions as well. Do you think that compromise, that meeting in the middle, is going to come maybe not necessarily more naturally, but is it going to be easier for people now that we've got 1 session under our belt, accepting the political realities? Or
yeah, so I think we saw this evolve in this last session over time, at least from my perspective, and this is a feeling and even a visual perspective. We talked about being a freshman, and being on the House floor is interesting. And I remember the first time, that first week, we're separated Republican and Democrat on the floor, and there's an aisle in between. I remember feeling, as I was walking across the aisle, it feels like a physical barrier you're walking through. Like you're actually feeling something internally. It got easier the second time and third time, and now I can do it. But as far as the margins are 31-29, Democratic governor. I think the majority party has been in power for a long time, and came in this year, sort of business as usual. And I think over the course of the session, realized that I think they depend on our votes a lot more than they realize. With a 31-29 margin, you can get a ton of 31-29 legislation passed that's going to be very the more far right side or less agreeable to Democrats, and it's going to get vetoed, right? So you can do a million bills that way, but they're all going to get vetoed. So to get anything done at all, you need Democratic votes.
Yeah.
And it really was an evolution over the course of the session. I think a lot of the majority party has, in some sense, a good amount more in common with the more moderate Democrats than with some people in their own party. So, realizing that they had to have those conversations across the aisle, and try to explain why a piece of legislation was a good thing for their district and for the state, and having those conversations, not just Democrats asking for Republican votes and asking to be put on Republican agendas, but for Republicans actually talking to Democrats and trying to persuade them why voting a certain way was the best thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree more. At the onset of session, once you all had elected your leadership, I remember having a conversation with Minority Leader Cano, and it was talking about, in this new political landscape, how best to navigate that kind of thing. And I said, one of the things that the majority has to come to realize at this point is, it's 1631 and 1, and overlooking that 1, it's to your own detriment. Effectively, you all are not in the minority. Because if there is no talking to the friends on the other side of the aisle, then there's a really, really, really good chance it's being met with a veto from Governor Hobbs. And, Representative Blattman, it's so funny to hear you talk about the literal crossing of the aisle. Prior to COVID, members were sort of peppered throughout the chamber floor. You had Democrats and Republicans sitting next to each other. The only seating that was sort of set in stone was having the leadership teams up there in that front row. And so it was during COVID, some folks wanted a mask, others didn't, being in a, enclosed space with a lot of people. So on the Senate side, it was, well, let's put the Democrats on one side, let's put the Republicans on the other. The House then later followed suit. I just have been disappointed that they didn't reverse course now that things are, sort of some semblance of normalcy again, because I don't like the visual. I don't like the message that sends. I enjoyed nothing more at times, for those listening in, the House and Senate buildings, 3 stories. I mean, there's the basement, but the floor is on the second floor. The gallery where folks from the public can come and watch what happens on the floor is on the third floor. And I've had a lot of fond memories of being on the third floor and watching Republicans and Democrats while they're voting, just kind of ribbing each other. And, you know, that collegialism that develops just by virtue of who your neighbor is on the floor. And so anyway, I just think that's an unfortunate sort of post-COVID thing that hasn't changed.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I know both Democrats and Republicans also prefer it be intermingled. And just from sort of a slightly different experience. So I'm on the two committees you mentioned, Military Affairs and Public Safety and Ways and Means. Military Affairs and Public Safety, we were in the committee hearing split between Democrats and Republicans, one side of the room, the other side of the room. It was still a great committee. We, got along as a group, but you did feel more of that partisan, thing going on when you're sitting on opposite sides of the room trying to make a point from one another. Ways and Means, on the other hand, Chairman Carter had us intermingled. I was sitting next to a Republican on one side, Democrat on the other side. Behind me was a Republican. I mean, and I chatted with the Republican next to me. I chatted with a Democrat next to me. We all chatted together. And it really did make for a better committee. Yeah. It made for a better working relationship, made for better, interpersonal, and it really, it was a better experience. So I hope we can do that on the House floor.
And just real quick on your committee assignments, what an interesting smattering. I mean, did you, I have to ask, members do get to make a request of certain committees. I don't know, were these committees you had asked for, or just kind of, they said, hey, this is where you're headed?
Yeah. So the freshman thing from earlier, right? I didn't know. Do your request. So they could have told me that, they picked it out of a hat and I would but we did get to put in our request to Democratic leadership, who then communicated with majority leadership, who ultimately they make the decisions together. I requested commerce, I requested Ways and Means, and I requested elections.
Okay.
I'm kind of happy I didn't get elections, to be honest. That is a very there's a lot. They don't agree on much in the elections committee.
No, you dodged that bullet.
Yeah, but Ways and Means and Commerce, more, these are business tax matters. We find ourselves agreeing on a lot more things. So they gave me Ways and Means, which I've enjoyed very much. Military Affairs and Public Safety was a surprise, but I'm enjoying learning about it. It's been a great committee. You get to hear some very heartfelt testimony from veterans and the widows of people who have fallen in line of duty. So it's been a very really great committee to be on and to be a part of. But yes, you get to put in what you'd like to be on, and then told what you're actually. Same with offices, you get to request offices, you get a few other requests, and then they give you.
Well, leading into the last part of our discussion here, next week you guys will resume legislative action after a few weeks off. It was a pretty unprecedented move that the House and Senate passed the budget, did a little bit of work, and then adjourned for about a month. Typically, you adjourn for the year once you've got the budget, maybe those last items left. But as I said, you're going to be going back for at least a couple of days next week. And then the rumor is adjourned for a month or so again, come back early fall. Can you give us a little background as to what's going on behind the scenes? What's the process down at the legislature, and what's your take on that?
So I think as a lawmaker, I'm supposed to pretend that I know everything going on with every facet, and I'm like vitally important to everything going on, but I'm not. I'm a freshman, as we pointed out. So my understanding of what's going on right now, they've been calling it spring break. I think this is the third one, and it's been multiple weeks at this point. I'd rather be down at the Capitol doing work. Still going in a good number of days to meet with constituents and meet with someone lobbying for a particular issue.
Good for you.
And I'd like to be back there doing the work. So we're on this break again, and we're going to be back in Monday, Tuesday, voting on some bills. There's some bills left to be done. Then there's appointments, which are still sort of not fully resolved yet in the Senate, where Governor Hobbs, I think, has only gotten a handful of her appointments actually pushed through at this point. So that'll need to be dealt with. And then Proposition 400 is the big one, right? That's a very important issue for our state, for our county. the infrastructure, the half-cent sales tax that has funded infrastructure and the growth of our economy over the past couple of decades is critical. This was the one vetoed by Ducey sort of as a surprise last session. So that's being negotiated right now. I'm hoping we can come to an agreement on that. I'm hoping it's as close to the original version as possible, since that was a bipartisan bill that everyone agreed on and everyone was happy to pass. So I'm hopeful that Proposition 400 is able to get over the line. Right now, it's mostly the majority party tells us when we're going to work and when we're not going to work. I think there might be some vacation plans involved in when we go and when we don't. So I just like to know the schedule so I can take my own vacation.
Well, I got to tell you, only in recent years have vacation schedules sort of derailed the process. It's always been the other way around. The process derails vacation schedules. John and I, we were always taught no plans between January and July 1. I'm sorry, just be prepared to be in session. That's why we are not winter sports people, for example. But, our understanding, as you said, the plan is to come back 12th and 13th, get some bills done, adjourn again. We had been hearing that the Senate leadership wanted to remain in session much longer. We had heard as late as into November. The latest we're hearing now is an August 1 target to adjourn for the year. And my understanding is because that's the sort of deadline they have to hit in order for the family tax rebate that was passed in the budget to actually, operationalize as law. So, but to your point, I'm hearing the same thing, a lot of moving pieces, housing, Prop 400, and then hopefully call it a session. I also have to comment, it's just so refreshing to hear you say that despite these spring breaks, extended adjournments, whatever it may be, you're coming in and meeting with constituents and continuing the work. We call it a citizens legislature because ostensibly it's this part-time gig where, you leave the plow in the field to come and make policy, and then you return to the plow when you're done making policy. For those, this is a year-round gig, Representative Blattman, and I know that those who really engage in a way where they want to move the needle, it's a full-time job.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, I take it very seriously. My goal from day one was to be an effective representative for my district and, do a good job while I'm there. I think anyone should take pride in the work that they're doing. And I take it very seriously. And when we do sine die and go back, I still do plan on going in because the building is open. From my understanding, the assistants are there. So I plan on to keep working. And also when not doing that, I'm here in my district right now. And I take being a part of my community very seriously. So when I'm not at the Capitol, I'm also working very hard in my community.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Representative Blattman. We appreciate it. Good luck next week. And hopefully the next spring break, you're able to schedule some vacation plans in there.
Real vacation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
This episode of the ASCPA podcast originally aired as part of the Legislative Scoop webinar series. To learn more about the Arizona Society of CPA's advocacy efforts, visit ascpa.com/advocacy or learn more in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to like, share, and review.